Welcome to Bethel Congregational United Church of Christ. I am not Pastor David. I am Erin Barber, our program coordinator, and I am going to let you guys know that I'm not going to have David rappel in on a wire from the rafters. I wanted to go with that, but due to travels and COVID exposure, we've made the decision that David needs to be remote this week. We do have him joining us via Zoom, so we still get to do our Stump the Pastor sermon. I have all your wonderful questions that you've submitted over the past several weeks. So if you are in person or joining with us via Zoom today, you kind of have a level playing field. So.
Good morning, everybody. Hey, it's great to see you. And I'm sorry to say that we've had experience with this before when COVID reared its ugly head. And I am feeling just fine. I'm symptom-free, but I have been exposed to someone who's been fairly sick with COVID, and I just wanted to practice an abundance of caution. So here we are. I'm delighted to be here via Zoom, but I really wish I could be there because I want some of that chili. But I'm guessing maybe somebody will make a care package for me. At any rate, delighted to be here. I'm glad to be back and look forward to worshiping with you in person next week.
You guys may take your seats. Thank you so much. So, kiddos, if you want to come find a seat in the front pew. So if you see where I'm pointing, there's chairs right here that are purple. And we're going to see David up on the screen. And we'll share some questions with him. Test, perfect. So have any of you guys seen Wizard of Oz? You know that moment where, I'm so tempted to have David say, I am the great and powerful Oz, but we won't today.
I am the great and powerful Oz. Not really.
All right, so some of you shared some questions in our box, so I'm gonna read some out, and we're gonna see what Pastor David has to say for an answer. So David, this one was asked by a 4-year-old. Is Jesus made from the church?
That is a very good question. I'm not exactly sure. I would say that Jesus was certainly a real human being, and he had such a remarkable influence on the people who were around him that when he died and was missing in body, people really realized that his spirit was still there and alive in them. So it's really more Jesus made the church than the church makes Jesus. So that's my best shot at it.
Got an applause. You're off to a great start. All right. And this one might be kind of a follow-up to what you've just said. How is Jesus everywhere at the same time?
Oh, what a lovely question. I would say that Jesus is everywhere in the same way that love is everywhere. We don't always see it or recognize it, but just because we don't see it or recognize it doesn't mean it's real or there. And so, one of the aspects of our Christian faith is there's a certain amount of mystery to it. Mystery means we can't entirely figure it out, but on some level we know it deeply. So, I think wherever love is shared, that's where Jesus is.
All right, we're going to do one more with the kiddos. And again, you've kind of answered this a little bit already, but I just like this question, so I'm going to ask it. Has Jesus ever come to our church?
Oh, every moment of every day. In fact, Jesus is here right now in our memories, in our hearts, in our minds, in the way that we treat one another. That brings Jesus alive. It doesn't have to be in the human body that we look at when we see pictures of Jesus. That's the way he was when he walked around on earth. But today, his spirit is with us, and that makes it just as real as if his body was here, even in some ways more powerful.
All right. Thank you so much, David.
Thank you for your questions. I love them. Keep asking them.
We do have more, but I know the kids have some fun planned in Sunday school, so we're going to let them get going for that. So, kiddos, you're going to meet Miss April and Miss Natalie and Miss Lori over by the door over there, and you guys get to head over to class, and we will see you later. And then if I could hand my lovely microphone to an usher, we will get ready for our...
And good morning. Our scripture this morning comes from the Gospel according to Luke. Chapter 15 includes the three parables of things that were lost and found: a sheep, a coin, and a prodigal son. Today's passage focuses on the sheep and the coin. Listen for the way these parables describe God's persistent and graceful searching for what is lost, and God's spirit of celebration when the lost is found. Hear now as I read verses 1 through 10 of the 15th chapter of Luke, as translated in the Message by Eugene Peterson. By this time, a lot of men and women of questionable reputation were hanging around Jesus, listening intently. The Pharisees and religious scholars were not pleased, not at all pleased. They growled, "He takes in sinners and eats meals with them, and treating them like old friends." Their grumbling triggered this story. Suppose one of you had 100 sheep and lost one. Wouldn't you leave the 99 in the wilderness and go after the lost one until you found it? When found, you can be sure you would put it across your shoulders, rejoicing. And when you got home, call in your friends and neighbors, saying, "Celebrate with me, I've found my lost sheep." Count on it. There's more joy in heaven over one sinner's rescued life than over 99 good people in no need of rescue. Or imagine a woman who has 10 coins and loses one. Won't she light a lamp and scour the house, looking in every nook and cranny until she finds it? And when she finds it, you can be sure she will call her friends and neighbors. "Celebrate with me, I found my lost coin." Count on it. That's the kind of party God's angels throw every time one soul turns to God. May the wisdom of these parables awaken in us the power of grace to restore human dignity.
Thank you, Beth. All right, we are at the time of our instant sermon where we get to invite David to answer these questions that we've come up with. I feel like I'm addressing God. David, do you want to know the categories of the questions and choose from a category, or do you want me to just launch them at you?
How about you tell me the categories?
Oh, one
and
second,
I'll-
David. Now go ahead.
Why don't you tell me the categories, and then I'll say pick one from that category. How's that?
Great. Okay. So we've got, of course, we've got the political climate and loving others. That's in one category. We've got being a Christian. We've got questions about the Bible. And then we've got a random category / questions for David, about David.
Okay, then. That last category, I'm assuming I have some flexibility with answering those questions. Let's go with Bible trivia for 200.
I did think when I was driving in today, I should have made a Jeopardy board. This would have been so cool. Yeah, next year. All right, questions about the Bible. All right. Why was the Gospel of Thomas not included in the Bible? Should it still be read even though it is not included?
Oh, we have a biblical scholar in our midst. Um, there are lots of non-canonical scriptures that were floating around in the early church that were not necessarily included in the canon. And the Gospel of Thomas, I suspect, was excluded from the canon because it emphasized Jesus' humanity more so than his divinity. And I think the folks who were putting the canon together really wanted to make sure that the divinity of Christ was emphasized, not the humanity of Christ. I haven't read the Gospel of Thomas in a long time. I still think it's worth reading. So the answer is yes. I think these non-canonical texts are important to read, just like good fiction is important to read today. And, good documentaries are good to watch. There's not lots of non-canonical uh, resources that can help us on our journey of faith. Thomas also, some of the non-canonical stuff has fairly Gnostic um, descriptions of things which would have meant something to the people at the time, but they're pretty mysterious to us and they might seem kind of far out and wacky. So I think that's one of the reasons that Thomas was left out of the canon. I wish my wife were in the room because she wrote her senior thesis in college on the Gospel of Thomas. But she's in the other room with her congregation.
Yes, if you didn't know, David's wife, Jeannie, is also a pastor at another church. All right. I have one that is a visual question, and I'm actually going to skip it, but I want to make a note of it because if you ask this question about a symbol, I invite you to come to Pints with a Pastor on Friday, and then you can corner David and ask him then. All right, so our other question is a little bit of a heavier one. Can you help us understand the violent occurrences in the Old Testament? So it refers to men, women, and children being killed in the name of the Lord or by the Lord.
Yeah, those are difficult sections, but you have to remember that they were written so many years ago that God was almost more like a warrior cult figure. And so also this everything that's written in the Old Testament or the Hebrew scriptures is written after the fact. So you've got the filter of the priests who wanted to tell the history the way they wanted it to be told. It's a little bit like even history today. It gets written by the victor or the dominant class rather than the underclass. And so they very much interpreted God as being definitely on their side and against everything else. And so, clearly, if you want to make God on your side, that's the way you tell the history. And I think that there has just seemed to be more tolerance of violence, and unfortunately, it has been extrapolated so that today there are segments of our Christian faith, and of course other religious traditions that go to that literal interpretation and say that God's okay with violence happening as long as it's happening to the wrong people. Um, the other thing to keep in mind with the Hebrew text is that it is like a library. So you have to read the Hebrew text in the context of the sort of the arc of the story, because there are awful sections, but then there are also incredibly loving sections, like the book of Ruth, and like the book of Jonah, which talks about God. Jonah says, I thought you were a God of wrath, but yet, yeah, you let those Ninevites off the hook. Why did you do that? Well, that's in some ways to counter the violence that's shared in those other texts. So um, there's more to it than just the violence, and I think we have to also remember that we're looking at this through Christian glasses and a Christian perspective, and Jesus never condoned violence.
Thanks, David. That is what we have for the Bible category. Do you want to choose the next category?
Oh, sure. Which one did you think was the most controversial? The political one?
Yeah, I would say our political climate / loving others category is probably the next heavy hitter.
All right, let's jump in.
Okay. All right. This one, I have two that are pretty related. So I'm going to kind of combine a little bit.
Okay.
How can I honor my mother, father, or parents when their ideology is harmful to marginalized people? And then similarly, how do I love my neighbor as myself if my neighbor is a white supremacist, misogynist, and or does not accept LGBTQ plus people?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and it's not simple to answer. Except I would just call us back to the text today, and you'll remember it starts with the Pharisees grumbling about who Jesus was hanging out with. And I always I always keep that in the back of my mind when I'm trying to decide how do I love someone whose beliefs not only are different from mine, but they actually cause harm to others. And, I oftentimes use the term the reptilian brain, and the reptilian brain would like to be like a dinosaur and just chew the head off the person that's driving us crazy. But that just leaves a headless enemy. It's really difficult. I think the best, what I try to do anyway, is listen through the fear that may be behind why it is that they have these particular beliefs. So I try to look at it as a almost like a sociologist or an anthropologist. What might be driving a person to have this particular kind of belief? And almost, I would say 9 times out of 10, the people I know that are against LGBTQIA plus folks don't actually have a real relationship with a person who is out to them. And so it becomes this sort of concept out there that seems odd, and therefore it doesn't fit the norm. I also pray for people who have these very difficult and challenging beliefs. I mean, um, the death of Charlie Kirk, the murder of Charlie Kirk, has generated all kinds of responses and questions, and I would say that sometimes two things can be true at the same time. Um, Murder is never a solution to silencing someone whose beliefs are different than ours. So first thing is, murder is never right. It's always wrong. It should never happen. Having said that, I can understand the impetus, again, maybe the reptilian vengeance place where we could go to if we felt like the kinds of things that Charlie Kirk said in the milieu in which he created these sort of what I consider to be rigid and hateful beliefs, um, I could understand why someone would want to silence them and disagree with them, but killing them's just not the answer, because you know what happens is it's gonna amplify that perspective. And so on the one hand, I can understand it, but it doesn't do any good. And murdering somebody's never right.
All right. If Jesus was going to preach in Portland today, where and how do you think he would do it, and why?
Well, I hope to think that he's somehow channeling through me, but You never know. Um, that's a really good question. I think Jesus would probably be in the middle of the kinds of discussions that are happening that involve the larger life of the community. I think that Jesus might be, preaching in City Hall, or he might be preaching to the Washington County commissioners, or even to the governor. And I would like to say that the bishop of the National Cathedral is actually speaking as Christ to President Trump during that service that happened several months ago. So wherever the downtrodden, the excluded, the disenfranchised are living, that's where Jesus would be. So, for example, I think he would be advocating for affordable housing and the kinds of decisions that are being made by policymakers. To have more humility for people who are living outside, to address the kinds of systemic issues that cause domestic violence, and addiction. So all of those social justice challenges that threaten the well-being of people, I think is where Jesus would be preaching and speaking today.
Okay. And then I'll do one more from this category. By our very existence, Bethel shows an alternative to Christian nationalism. What else should we do to counter their misguided beliefs and popularity?
Um, I think we just have to keep doing what we're called to do the good that we're called to do, be strong about what we believe and who we are, not be intimidated by fear, and um, when we have the opportunity for nonviolent expressions of disapproval of what's happening in the public sphere, I think that's always a good thing as long as it's nonviolent. I also think that to the best that we can do as Christians, not to vilify and demonize people on the other side because that's what they're doing to us. And of course, Jesus would not want demonizing of anybody happening. Um, so that's we just have to keep doing what we're doing, not be afraid to do it, share our story, tell our truth, without it being exclusively true, just our truth as we understand it from God.
All right. So our last two categories are the random slash just questions for you, and then being a Christian.
Oh, let's go with some random questions about me for 1,000.
Yeah. Um, all right, I thought this one was pretty random. By all accounts, Jesus had long, unruly hair. Did he ever try a man bun?
You know what? If it would make men with buns comfortable, he would probably put his hair up in a bun to make sure they felt like he could identify with them.
There we go, folks.
Hey, I'm not hearing as much applause as I heard with the kids. So,
All right, you heard that, right?
I did hear
Okay,
that.
great. And this one I thought was a very interesting one for you, and I'll let you explain why. What's your favorite color?
Oh, you know what? There was a sneaky thing happening when I was on sabbatical about the moderator whose name will remain anonymous, but she knows who she is, said to me during a board meeting, we had one of these opening things about what's your favorite color? Not knowing that that was going to be the color painted on my office walls. But aquamarine is my favorite color. It's partly because I can generally see it. and it reminds me of water. And this summer, our son Caleb said, "Dad, if you had to choose between the mountains and the ocean where you were going to live, which would you choose?" And I said, "Well, I don't necessarily have to choose one or the other because in Oregon we have both. But I'm definitely a water person. I don't know if that's got anything to do with my zodiac sign of being Pisces, but I love water. I grew up with a gurgling river running in front of my house and on the lake and near the ocean. And so yeah, aquamarine.
Nice. Yeah, give it up for Aquamarine. All right. Next question. Where did you go on vacation?
Oh, I went to a rural spot in Maine, in, believe it or not, Washington County, Maine. So I live in Washington County in Oregon, and our cabin is in Washington County, Maine. This cabin has been in the family. My boys will make it fifth generation, and it's on a spring-fed lake, which is huge, and you can drink the water. That's how clean it is. It's spring-fed. You can see down about 30 feet, which is pretty amazing. So that's partly, I mean, it's because it's so remote and it just doesn't get as much activity as most of the lakes that are closer to Boston or any of the metropolitan areas. It's about a 6 hour drive from Boston. Um, and I remembered that in 1943, my great grandfather, Frank Tucker, bought that lot from Nellie Higgins for $150. And it has 300 feet of lake frontage. And the down payment was $10. That was the down payment. Um, so it feels like I'm part of that legacy. It's a very peaceful place for me. Um, And some of you may know that last summer I discovered that, well, let me back up and say, my very generous, gracious sister said, "David, I want the camp to stay in our family, so I'm not going to force you to buy me out. I'm going to give you my half of the cabin and the property." And that was terrific, except 2 weeks later, we found out that erosion was going to require a movement physically of the camp 25 feet away from the lake shore. Well, you can, even in rural Maine, this is not an inexpensive project. So my sister, a couple of weeks before I left, offered to help pay for it, which was just an amazing, graceful, wonderful thing to have happen. And our boys were both with us, Caleb and his fiancee Lauren, and they announced their date with which they're going to be married, and it's February 13th, 2027. And we looked at them and we said, "What on earth is the significance of February 13th, 2027?" And they said, "Well, Lauren grew up in the Bay Area and they want to be married in City Hall in San Francisco. And that was the earliest date that they could get for that venue." Well, the good news is they also asked Jeannie and me to officiate their wedding. So that was like, woohoo, that was pretty wonderful. Um, so I'll wrap up the time with when I made my trip back here, I had a neighbor drive me to Bangor, which is a 2 hour drive, and I got on a Concord Trailways bus for 4 hours to Boston. And then I took a flight, a 6.5 hour flight from Boston to PDX. So it makes for an interesting travel day, to say the least. But it's a great place. But I love both places. I love both sides of the country. I'm very fortunate and blessed that way.
Yay. Thank you so much, David.
Do you want to hit one more of these questions, like the Christian question?
Oh, sure. Let me see if I can
Although
find
I
it.
don't know how much, I'm looking at my watch, it's 10:43, and I'm sure there are other things that need to happen, but I mean, I could do this, until 4 o'clock this afternoon when the Broncos are on.
Oh, boy.
But I won't make you do that.
Trying to find one that's not too meaty, because I feel like you could go into these for a long time. Okay, I found one that could potentially be a short one, but what do I know? When we pray, who are we addressing? God or Jesus? How do we decide? It does say on the question.
To me, the Trinity, that is the Creator God, Jesus, the man who became for us the Christ, and the Holy Spirit, are all interrelated. And when I pray, I'm praying, depends on what kind of prayer I'm doing. If I'm praying a petition, like I want something in particular to happen, I feel like I'm praying to the Creator God, or Father God, or Parent God, however you want to describe that Creator, a dimension of God's being. Um, and you see, the interesting thing is that Jesus was the man, and Christ is the living expression of that man today. So there's Jesus of history and Christ of the kind of the more universal sense that is not bound by time or place. So when I pray my centering prayer, I try to be quiet and quiet myself, and then uh, I try to remove any boundaries that I might have about God and let the kind of thing that I need from the God that in that moment bubble up through me. So sometimes it might be compassion. Sometimes it might be strength. Sometimes it might be serenity. So for me, God has lots of these kind of components or aspects, um, and it just depends on where I am in my prayer life and where I am and what's going on in the world. With this Charlie Kirk murder and all the firestorm that it's released, my prayer is kind of into the universe of peace and justice, and I don't have to personify it, although sometimes I do. Um, so anyway, I don't know if that's a short or a long answer, but that's what I got.
I think that was just right. All right. Well, thank you so much, David. We're going to get to hear from Nate and Meredith